Greetings from the Asian Productivity Organization, Tokyo. This is Ngo from the Policy and Analysis Unit. And today, in this APOP talk, we are pleased to share with you some insight on the topic of productivity outlook, trends, and linkages. These are part of the findings of the APO Productivity Outlook 2021, a joint study between the APO and the Korea Development Institute, or in short, the KDI. The APO Productivity Outlook 2021 is the first edition in the annual series that analyzes the sectoral productivity level and growth and its related matters. The APO initiated this research as a stepped-up effort to support the policymakers in the APO members to monitor productivity trends and economic performance. It's also aimed to supplement the national statistic on productivity that the APO have been publishing annually for the past decade. So the formation of the research partnership with the KDI, one of the renowned think tanks in the Asia Pacific, is a key to conduct this study for the APO. In today's P-Talk, we are pleased to have two speakers representing the APO KDI research team, Dr. Si-Wook Lee, Professor, KDI School of Public Policy and Management, and KDI Senior Research Associate, Dae-Hong Kim, to share highlights from this research. And thank you, Dr. Lee and Mr. Kim, for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And the first edition of the APO Productivity Outlook 2021 focuses on the manufacturing sector. It is because manufacturing sector is the backbone of the Asian economy, and a thriving manufacturing sector has long been recognized as a crucial driver to raising productivity and economic growth in the Asia Pacific. The APO Productivity Outlook 2021 investigate the existing trends and underlying determinants of manufacturing productivity and the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the sector, as well as the implication to tackle the challenges and the prospect for productivity growth as a whole. So to begin with, we'd like to invite Mr. Dae-Hong Kim to give an overview on the development of manufacturing productivity across the APO members. Mr. Kim, please.
So thank you very much. Thank you for the introductions and thank you for inviting me. So today I'm going to be presenting the key result of Asian Productivity Outlook project, and I worked on over the last year with Professor Lee as part of the project. So in my presentations, basically, I will talk about the productivity trends before the pandemic, and also I'm going to discuss the emerging challenges, especially in the post-COVID era. So let me briefly start. Let me start by just briefly explaining the motivations for this my specific chapter and also the project in general. So there's kind of the stylized fact that a broad-based slowdown in productivity growth before the pandemic was on the way, due largely to the aftermath of the Great Recession of 2007 and 2009. So it was particularly significant and sharper in the manufacturing sector. So after the outbreak of the COVID-19, so the manufacturing firms and the industries have inevitably reduced their operation activities. So while at the same time adjusting the employment to a lower labor cost, simply by firing workers, granting temporary leave, and so on. So this pose a threat of further slowing down of productivity growth that was already exist before the pandemic. So as you probably know, like the Ms. Hung explained, this is very critical and crucial for enhancing the productivity and also the economic growth in the long run. So as you know, the manufacturing sector is the often touted as a growth engine of national economies, largely for two reasons. First, the manufacturing sector provides a pathway of structural change, which stands for a shift of the workforce from low productivity sector to higher productivity ones, so thereby leading to large scale of employment creations and improvement in income. At the same time, secondly, it is a vital source of technological innovations, which can be developed and applied and also diffused to other sectors for further higher productivity growth. So, however, such economic benefit of manufacturing development would be degraded because of the outbreak of COVID-19. So the key questions that I'm going to address in my presentation is about then how the disruptions mainly caused by the COVID-19 outbreak would affect the future of manufacturing labor productivity. So to find the answer to the questions, so we are focused on 7 countries, 2 high-income countries such as Japan and Republic Korea, and 5 middle-income countries are Thailand, Indonesia, India, Philippines, and Vietnam. So simply speaking, these 7 countries are selected as a representative of different level of income or their industrialization level. So among 21 APO member countries. So let's move on to Then, so to this end, I'm gonna just talk about first how the pre-existing trends of manufacturing productivities have changed after the Great Recession 2007 and 2009 and their underlying causes. And secondly, so I'm going to explore the evolving impact of pandemic-induced crisis on manufacturing activities and productivity. And lastly, I'm going to conclude by summarizing the key result and discussing some challenges and prospects, including the policy implications for the productivity growth in manufacturing in the context of COVID-19. So then let's move on to my first part of presentations before COVID-19. So let's look into this graph first. This graph shows changes in manufacturing productivity growth before and after the Great Recessions. So as you can see, the most APO member countries experienced the slowdown in manufacturing productivity growth. But what is notable here is that the Republic Korea, as you can see at the bottom of this graph, it was particularly steep in these countries. But at the same time, however, there are some exceptions to sharp slowdown of productivity growth, such as Vietnam and the Philippines. Especially these 2 countries even boasted robust growth in the period of the following the Great Recessions. Then why? So to better understand such growth patterns, so I applied a typology to explain the experiences of 7 country examples. So using growth rate of the labor inputs and output, which are the basic component of labor productivities. So as you can see this figure, in the shaded area here, so there are 5 countries: Indonesia, India, Japan, Thailand, and Republic Korea. So basically, these 5 countries experienced the productivity slowdown right after the Great Recession or before the pandemic. So these 5 countries can be classified into group number 1 or simply slowdown group. In contrast to these 5 countries, the Philippines and Vietnam, like I explained earlier, they showed further acceleration of productivity in the Philippines and these 2 countries. So these 2 countries can be classified into group number 2 or acceleration group. So based upon this analysis, so I draw this table. These 2 high-income countries, Japan, Republic Korea, and 3 middle-income countries, Thailand, India, Indonesia. These 5 countries are basically in group number 1 or slowdown group. On the other hand, the Philippines and Vietnam, these 2 countries are in group number 2 or acceleration group. So based upon these clarifications, so I'm going to further explain, so what are the underlying causes of shaping such patterns of productivity growth after the Great Recession or before the pandemic. So I'd like to highlight that there are two major drivers that can explain such growth patterns. So first one is the at the macro level, trade and investment. So let's say the changing landscape of global trade and investment after the Great Recessions played a very significant role of shaping such growth patterns. Let's look into this graph first, global trade trends. So as you can see, since the Great Recession in 2009, the growth in export and import volumes has gradually slowed down. So in that regard, as you can see, these two graphs, Japan and Republic Korea, these two countries also shows a broad-based slowdown of manufacturing exports. So especially this pattern was very much associated with declining pattern of productivity growth. So then what about the other 5 middle-income countries? So regardless of such the growth patterns before the pandemic, these 5 middle-income countries became global hubs for the manufacturing production in the post-Great Recession period, largely driven by the significant FDI inflows in those countries. So let's look into this figure on the left-hand side below. As you can see, FDI inflows in those 5 countries. So from 2000s, it increased significantly, and after the 2008, after the Great Recessions, it decreased significantly, and after that, after the 2012, it increased gradually up to 2020. So that reason they became global hubs, kind of manufacturing productions. Especially what is notable here is that the such a significant increase of FDI inflows to form the manufacturing production base led 2 countries here, the Philippines and Vietnam, to the further growth in manufacturing, especially the manufacturing productivity growth. So I'm going to explain further detail. So let's look into this graph here first. As you can see, these 2 countries, the Philippines and Vietnam, so interestingly, they shows the robust growth of manufacturing export and imported intermediate goods in the post-Great Recession period. So I'm assume that this led to the notable productive gains in manufacturing for these 2 countries. Especially this pattern is very much significant and notable as compared to other regional peers such as Thailand, Indonesia, and India. And also the second point, so at the industrial level, we also revealed that another compelling factor underlying the post-Great Recession, I mean the post-Great Recession growth in manufacturing, can be largely attributed to the speeds of technological changes. So let's look into this table below here. So in the slowdown group, there's 2 countries, I mean the high-income countries, Japan and Republic Korea. They shows a notable drop of the manufacturing value added, especially in relatively high-tech industries such as mid-high or high technology industries at the manufacturing sector. On the other hand, as you can see on the right-hand side, these 2 countries, the Philippines and Vietnam, even they experienced the notable growth of their, let's say, core industries or relatively high-tech industries. So this is very much important and significant. And let's simply speaking, these 2 high-income countries experienced their constriction in their core industry in this given period of time. At the same time, these 2 other countries, let's say Philippines, Vietnam, they experienced notable expansion of their core industries. So I can explain further detail here. These 2 countries, let's look into this graph here above. So one of the fastest growing the industries was found in ICT manufacturing industries, not only in the Philippines and parts of Vietnam. So based upon that, let's say, based upon the enhanced manufacturing, the capacities, so these two countries have also achieved leapfrog growth in terms of ICT goods export. As you can see, this graph below here, the Philippines, Vietnam, even as compared to other regional peers, at the same time, also the high-income countries, Japan and Republic of Korea, these two countries, they showed relatively high growth in terms of ICT goods export. So then I will move on to the second part of my presentations, which shows the evolution of the pandemic-induced crisis. And first, I'm going to explain how then the mobility and economic activities could have affected by the COVID-19. So I'm sure that you are now quite familiar with this graph now, which shows daily new confirmed COVID-19 cases. So as we all know now, the virus was rapidly and widely diffused from the early 2020. And then immediately forced the governments, even all of the world, to shut down almost all economic activities. So therefore, the people's daily mobility along the combined with the economic activities has been halted. So this story can be found in this graph here on the right-hand side. There are higher government measures or sticker and the higher mobility restrictions across these countries. So therefore, ultimately, so negative economic shocks were inevitable for all these countries. So let's look into the economic impact on the manufacturing activities in the following. So as can be found in these three graphs, regardless of the country's stage of development or industrialization level, the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on manufacturing activities has been very much profound, especially in the second quarter of 2020, which was the period right after the outbreak of COVID-19. Especially these patterns are very much consistent with the patterns of mobility restrictions and largely driven by containment measures. What is notable here is that a decrease in manufacturing activities was particularly pronounced middle-income countries. You can see these two graphs, especially low-middle-income countries. But thankfully, as you may notice, a gradual recovery to pre-pandemic level has been found, especially in the first quarter of 2021. But I'm going to explain on this matter in more detail later on. Then, based upon the such findings, we also try to explore the initial impact of COVID-19 on labor productivity in manufacturing. But taking into account the data limitations, we compiled and collected from various sources and predicted how the pandemic would affect on labor productivity in manufacturing. So first, as for these two countries, Japan and Republic of Korea, I collected data from each country's the National Productivity Center, and then we revealed that compared with the first quarter of 2020, before the outbreak of COVID-19, these two countries' productivities, especially in manufacturing, dropped significantly. As you can see here, Japan and also Republic of Korea as well. But I'm sure that this story is not much different from the middle-income countries. So as for these 5 middle-income countries, due to data limitations, we used the surveys conducted by the Asian Development Bank and World Bank, and we analyzed them and compared them. So we also revealed that sales and employment of manufacturing firms had fallen significantly, like I mentioned earlier, because of strict lockdown and quarantine measures. So which means the spread of COVID-19 has significantly disrupted manufacturing firms' operations. So therefore, the resulting unintended negative consequences would have long-lasting impact manufacturing productivity growth. So conclusion. So to sum up, in the pre-pandemic period exam, like I explained earlier, the seven selected countries can be classified into two different groups based upon their growth trend of manufacturing productivity right after the Great Recessions. First, slowdown group, second, acceleration group. But there are two major factors of shaping such growth trend. The first, the changing the configurations of trade and investment, and second, the at the industrial level, the technological change. But of course, although the effect would have been differed from country to countries depending on their country stage of development or income level. However, like I explained earlier, once again, the spread of COVID-19 had severely disrupted manufacturing activities across all countries, particularly in the second quarter of the pandemic-scared year. But as you probably know, the gradual but uneven recovery to pandemic level was identified, especially these days. But I assume that the full recovery still remained uncertain. This is largely because of the potential risk of the few further large-scale contagions, which can be found especially these days in South Korea, Republic Korea, as well as the outbreak of new variants such as Omicron and so on. So in conclusion, so views might be, I think, divided regarding prospect for the future productivity growth, especially in manufacturing sector. But drawing from our analysis result, so we can suggest or assume that this current ongoing pandemic will likely deepen the prolonged growth slowdown, very combined with the pre-existing underlying factors of productivities, let's say disrupted global supply chains or accelerated digital technologies. As for the first one, the disruption of the global supply chains, as we know, the investment in supply chain linkage are weakened by the shutdown of the manufacturing facilities. So especially leading manufacturing industry or firms will be much affected, and thus this will reduce the trade volume greatly. At the same time, as you probably know, the second one, as for the accelerated adoption of digital technology, the adoption of the digital technology has been accelerated across all countries. However, without the necessary preconditions to absorb the highly advanced digital technologies, the crisis-induced technology adoption would even deepen productivity gaps, not only within and but also across countries. So I suggest that, especially for APO member countries, the concerted policy effort should be made to tackle such challenges that are crucial to recover the pandemic fallout. First, for the disrupted global supply chains, government should implement the very targeted policy instruments to reinforce the disrupted production activities in the light of country-specific conditions, especially the level or degree of their integration into the global market. At the same time, also it is advisable to rebuild resilient institutions and growth-friendly business climate. They will be much important for especially latecomers or the middle or lower middle income countries to join GBCs, because the multinational companies, they are currently, I assume, they're seeking to reallocate their manufacturing facility to other countries. So probably other countries or the latecomers would seize the opportunity to join the GBCs. So as for the second one, the digital technology, so government should provide education and technology training for workforce. I think this will be very much crucial to complement the introduction of new ICT manufacturing technologies. And in terms of the hardware infra, so investing in upgrading or newly establishing digital technology, I mean digital infrastructures, will be very much important. So that's it for my presentation. But these two issues will be further discussed and presented by the Professor Lee in the following. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kim, for your presentation on the overarching pictures of the manufacturing labor productivity before and after the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it seems that regardless of the stages of development among the APO member countries, the spread of the COVID-19 has severely disrupted the manufacturing activities, and in turn, the manufacturing activity shut down in the APO members have also negatively resulted in labor productivity, and the weakening of the global value chains or the strengthening of the digitalization would be among the rich recommendation that you have came up with. And these are also the way forward that the member countries should paying attention to. So embarking on those observation and also recommendation that you have outlined, we'd like to invite Professor Lee for the elaboration on the crucial drivers of manufacturing productivity, global value chains, and ICT development. Professor Lee, please.
Okay, great. So I am very delighted to have this opportunity to share with you our research outcome, which are presented in the chapter 2 and 3 of the 2021 Asian Productivity Outlook. This time we actually explore two important drivers of productivity growth, so GBC participation and ICT development, with a special focus of these APO member countries. So we are going to introduce current status of GBC participation and the ICT development, and also we empirically investigate the relationship with the productivity growth, and then I'm going to briefly discuss about the policy implication at the end. Okay, so when we think about, usually we talk about that this GBC participation and ICT, the developments are really crucial driver of productivity growth. And then we can think of that there are multi-layered channels through which, for example, GBC can affect productivity. So, for example, if you engage in the GBC, then you can specialize your product or your task into some core task that your economy is more efficiently provide, while you can outsource the other part that actually increase your productivity in the efficiency. Similarly, if you participate in the GBC, then you can have this better access to variety of foreign inputs, which actually embodied a lot of up-to-date technology. Like also GBC involved much of foreign direct investment and multinational enterprise activities that actually link with some technological knowledge spillovers. So that could be the one of the channel that the GBC can affect this productivity, and most of trade liberalization issues. So that actually heightened the competition. So you have a competition effect, which also affect the domestic economy with the higher efficiency and the better resource reallocation. Similarly, if you look at this, ICT, then usually ICT producing sectors has a superior productivity level. So if you have a higher share of ICT producing sectors, that means your overall economy's productivity is actually improved because of a composition effect. And also you can actually see there's some efficiency gain in the ICT using sectors. And at the same time, if you have a better ICT infrastructure, then that actually lowered your R&D cost, and then that also increases much more product variety. And you can also have an economy scale. So there are actually multiple channels through which this GBC and ICT can affect the productivity. So today's presentation, I'm going to just looking at this first, the GBC productivity nexus first, and then I'm going to talk about this linkage between GBC, the ICT, and the productivity. So when we talk about the GBC is actually the phenomenon where the different stage of a production process, like R&D, design, assembly, marketing, distribution, etc., is actually located across different countries. So when you look at the human history, always there are some form of global outsourcing exists for a long time, but the GBC have expanded in a quite accelerated pace since the second half of this 20th century. So that's the reason why we are pretty much interested in the GBC. And when we talk about the GBC participation, that can be actually defined as a share of GBC-related trade in the total trade. And then we can actually distinguish two different types of GBC participation. One for the backward GBC participation, and the other one is forward GBC participation. Backward GBC participation occurs when a country imports foreign intermediate to produce its export. So that actually related to the import channel. On the other hand, when you talk about the forward GBC participation, it is the case where that a country exports domestically produced input to another country, and then those inputs are embodied in this export of those trading partners. So this is pretty much related to the export channel. So in this study, we're actually looking at this, two different types of GBC participation and which actual channel is more important for productivity enhancement. So as Tae-Hong already mentioned, so we are going to just look at so quite different the classify these APO members across a different income group. Let's first look at the overall trend of GBC participation of the APO members. So generally, you can see that this GBC participation had expanded from the early 1990 to up to the before the financial crisis. So this is over the trend, and regardless of income level, this is pretty much the same. But after the financial crisis, global crisis, you can see that there is a slowdown of the pace of this this GBC participation. And at the same time, you can see that these low middle income countries among the APO members is a relatively lower level of GBC participation compared to the other groups like a high income countries group and also upper middle income countries group. But as I mentioned before, we have actually two different types of GBC participation. So I actually decompose into these two different types and look at what was the dynamics over time. And you can see that in case of a forward GBC participation, interestingly, lower middle income country, which actually will the lowest level of this GBC participation, but actually this forward GBC participation is actually highest among the different income group. And at the same time, you can see that the high income group is actually experienced quite declining of this forward GBC participation after this global financial crisis. On the other hand, if you look at the backward GBC participation, this low income, middle income group is actually have a lowest group. So that's the reason why low middle income group actually reveal the lowest level of GBC participation. So this is not because of a forward GBC participation, but because this of a backward participation. At the same time, if you look at the high income group, then even after the the global financial crisis, this actually backward GBC participation is actually not that much declining. So this is quite different from other income group, like upper middle income group and also lower middle income group. And if you look at the individual country, then you can see that Singapore and Republic of China, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Republic of Korea is among the countries that has the highest GBC participation, while Indonesia, India, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka has a relatively low level of GBC participation. And also, if you actually look at decompose this participation into the forward and backward, you can see that the country that has a relatively high GBC participation, large parts are usually come from the backward GBC participation. But on the other hand, if you look at the other side, then this relatively, again, backward participation is relatively lower, and the forward participation is a little bit bigger than than other group. And if you actually look at the GBC, then you can have much information. For example, you can actually look at what is actually your current value added composition of your gross manufacturing export. So I'm actually taking these 7 countries: India, Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, Korea, and Japan, and as of 2019, and then just look at what is the composition, what is contribution from the domestic value added, and what is the foreign value added. So, for example, if India actually sells a $100 value of export, then here 74.1 means that around the $74 is actually come from the domestic value added, and around the $26 is that come from the foreign value added. So if you look at the figure, then you can see that Vietnam and Philippines are among the countries that actually have a higher share of foreign value added. But definitely, this by construction, the higher share of foreign value added implies that the higher share of backward GBC participation. At the same time, you can actually have some idea that how much is come from the domestic manufacturing versus foreign manufacturing services as well. So that is quite an interesting thing, and there might be a lot of interesting questions that you can address with this GBC analysis. And even you can see that the sub sector level. So for example, this is a manufacturing sector, from the food and beverage to the transport equipment, and the by sector. Here, actually, tables show you that what is the foreign value added share for the gross export. And then you can see that, for example, Philippines and Vietnam is generally not specific for the individual sector, but generally Philippines and Vietnam have a higher share of this foreign value added. On the other hand, India, like Indonesia and Japan, has a relatively small share of foreign value added. And then as far as concerning industries, the coke and the petroleum and also machinery sector as actually have a relatively higher share of foreign value added. Now I'm going to move on, and then I'm going to just look at the linkage between GBC and productivity. So first, I'm going to just compare the relationship between GBC participation and the manufacturing productivity in levels. Okay, so this is actually your x-axis is a GBC participation, and the y-axis is a productivity level. And then you can see that there is a clear positive relationship between two, and you can further decompose into the forward participation and the backward participation. It seems that the forward participation has a more clear positive relationship than the backward participation. But we usually talk of the productivity growth. So if you want to examine productivity growth, you should be looking at the changes in GBC participation versus changes in manufacturing productivity, which gives a quite a different actually the graph. So here, for example, this is the relationship between changes in forward GBC participation and the productivity growth. It seems that a weak negative correlation is actually show up here. On the other hand, if you look at the backward participation, then you have a mild positive relationship between two. So that means overall, if you just combine this GBC participation forward and the backward, then you can see that there are not much of a relationship between two. But this is a simple correlation. So we want to just use the regression, and we just check that whether GBC participation is really important determinant or not for the productivity growth. So I'm actually did not actually include this result, but my actually empirical specification is like that. So I'm actually looking at the labor productivity growth rate that actually key the independent variables are actually backward GBC participation, changes in forward GBC participation, and other actually the control variables are export intensity, FDI intensity, level of human capital, inflation, financial debts, etc., etc. So when I actually ran the regression, and I found that this positive and significant load of a backward GBC participation for labor productivity growth. So the empirical results show that an increase by 1% in the level of backward participation tended to increase productivity by 0.7%. On the other hand, I could not find any statistically significant impact of the forward GBC integration to productivity. And other variable like FDI intensity and the financial depth is also important, the determinant for the manufacturing productivity for APO members. So I'm gonna just give you some discussion that my results show that this significant load of backward GBC participation for the productivity growth in manufacturing. So why is that? Because when you have this backward GBC participation, which means that you import foreign the inputs to use and produce your exporting items. So the increased access to the available variety of foreign intermediate goods may improve your overall production efficiency through the cost sharing, access to better quality inputs, and also technology knowledge spillovers. So this is pretty much consistent with what I discussed in the multi-layered channels through which this GBC participation impacted on this productivity growth. But the key issue here is recently we have a widespread protectionism in the global economy, and open protectionist measure is actually directed to the limit import from abroad. But this measure may have some effect on the improving the trade balance in the short term, but in the medium and long term, if I combine my result, then they later increase production cost to export, resulting in the decline in the export competitiveness and the industrial productivity, which means that even though there is a rising trade protectionism there, but you always be careful about that this backward GBC participation through import channel is still quite important for the improving your productivity in your country. But at the same time, even though I look at this causal link learns from the GBC to productivity, but there might be a two-way causal linkage. So maybe productivity level also affect the extent of GBC participation. Often many people think that because your country has a lower wage, so that actually can be the key factors for enabling your country to participate with the GBC. But the empirical evidence often do not actually support such a perception. So countries with the high productivity growth would generally have a higher wage, but still low unit labor cost producers. So they tend to more actively involve in the GBCs, implying that the unit labor cost, not the low wage, and thus productivity are more important factors for GBC participation than the low wage. And the trade cost is another important determinant of propensity and the intensity of GBC involvement. So that means always productivity is also important to get the more access to the GBCs. So this is about the GBC part, and then we can just move on to the ICT. So here, I actually decomposed this GDP growth into the several factors like labor quality, IT capital, non-IT capital, and the total factor productivity. And you can see that this gray bar is represented for the contribution of IT capital to economic growth. But you can see that in the early part of the 2010s, as well as the later part of the 2010s, so there are not much actually the contribution from the IT capital to economic growth. So most of really that's actually come from the non-IT capital or TFP. So key question here is why this contribution of this ICT capital is so minimal in case of APO countries. Is this due to the ICT small share in the total capital or slow investment? But if you look at this investment or capital formations, the ICT versus non-ICT, you can see that many countries, actually most of the countries actually invest more on this ICT than the non-ICT capital, which means that the ICT investment is increasing much faster than the non-ICT investment since the 2010. So it's not actually slow investment that matter, and especially low-income countries were more active in this ICT investment. So again, why lower income countries have not productivity gains from ICT capital, even though they actually invest a lot? So I actually ran the regression and the panel regression for these APO members, and I could find that only ICT capital has a positive effect on productivity in high-income countries, but not other countries. So which means that maybe if you want to have this ICT-led productivity gains, then your country needs some complementary factor to increase this productivity along with the ICT investment. For example, better the management practice, organizational capacities, and more competitive business environment and the human capital. So without these complementary factors, and if you just invest in the ICT, then that does not actually that much have increased productivity. And nowadays, ICT becomes more important because of rapid, digital transformation. So, but when we talk about this digital transformation or digitalization, then physical investment in ICT equipment is just only small part of a story. So policymakers need to think how to provide better access to digital technology and facilitate organizations in the various areas to leverage technology to improve productivity. So for example, business, if they use more ICTs and adopt more ICT equipment, then that increase productivity and accelerate the broad-based growth. People can actually expand opportunities and improve welfare by using more digital devices. And also government can increase the government efficiency and also accountability of service delivery. So not only just just invest in this physical the ICT equipment, but you also think about how you can make a better use of this ICT equipment, and that downs the issue of digital adoption issue. So this is again this APO members, and you can see that there are some countries, so high-income countries usually have a higher actually rate of digital adoption. But at the same time, if you look at this government, which is blue diamond, So there are not much difference in this adoption rate in terms of a government, but the key difference is actually businesses and the people. So which means that in order actually benefit from this digital transformation, then the government of APO members should not only focusing on the improving government efficiency, taking the e-government or something like that, but also not only invest in the ICT the equipment, but also you are thinking about how you can increase digital adoption from part of general consumers or business part. So that's the key issue and the key challenges that faced by this era of digital transformation. So if I conclude, then ICT capital investment appeared accounts for the relatively small shares in the overall labor productivity growth in these APO members, but our analysis demonstrate that the ICT investment can enhance manufacturing, labor productivity, and the economy-wide total productivity. But there is some heterogeneity, so you need also investment in the complementary factors such as workers training, management practice, also some other infrastructure. So that's the quite important one. And as far as we are concerning this digitalization, low productivity, the countries also scored low in the digital adoption index, indicating that the digital gap between countries is likely to widen rather than narrow. So only small share of firms are coping with this digitalization, while the others are behind. So policymakers need to nurture the small and medium-sized enterprise to adopt the digital technologies, but the policy options should not limit it to the providing subsidies. They need to actually improve effectiveness of existing policy, as well as promoting public awareness and utilizing market competition force. And yeah, this is my the end of presentation. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee, for shedding some light on the factors behind the GVC participation and the different patterns of ICT capital share, ICT investment in association with labor productivity in manufacturing sectors and economy-wide TFP of the APO member economies. And now I would like to pose some questions to both speakers just to confirm and elaborate the messages and the findings that came out from this study. And across all the member country, there are different members at different stage of the development. So the within sectors and between sectors effect do not imply the same result to foster economic growth. So the first question I would like to give to Mr. Kim is, which is more important for APO members who are seeking productivity convergence, enhancing within sector productivity or fostering structural change?
So thank you for the questions. So actually, in my paper, actually I also elaborate that point. But let's say both approaches are important, very crucial, regardless of the stage, the country's stage of development, such as within sector productivity growth and structure enhancing productivity growth. But taking carefully into considerations their industrialization level. So different approaches would be more appropriate. So for instance, first, as for the high-income countries or industrialized countries such as Japan and the Republic of Korea that had already underwent the industrialization process. So within sector productivity growth may be more crucial or important by investing in R&D activities that can create higher value added within manufacturing industries. And secondly, on the other hand, as for the lower middle-income countries, or let's say latecomers and less industrialized countries, I think that there are still ample opportunities for them just fostering the productivities by reallocating the workforce efficiently in their industries. So let's say called the structural change. So to sum up, the both are very important, but we have to carefully consider their industrial level. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your very clear answer. Different implication for two groups of high income, upper middle income, and versus the lower middle income. Now we're coming back to the presentation of Professor Lee. In the study as well, in the presentation, you have elaborated a lot on the global value chain. But it seems that global value chain participation does not automatically improve the competitiveness of the country. And different type of GVC participation will promote the productivity and competitiveness identically. So in your opinion, from this finding, is backward or forward GVC participation more important for the groups of middle income APO members?
Thanks. Actually, as I presented, I believe that the backward GVC participation is more important as far as concerning, productivity enhancement, especially in the long-term perspective. So in the short run, if you have natural resources and if you export, then you can actually increase your export, and then also you can have some, trade, surplus. But it does not guarantee that those, export promotion and, trade surplus can guarantee the long-term productivity growth, which is mostly important factor. So as far as you are actually concerning about this long-run perspective and more, sustainable economic growth, so my actually result, which is consistent with the existing result as well, that, backward participation is actually more important factor as far as concerning the productivity growth.
So the backward GVC participation is confirmed to be more important through this study as well for the APO members. We would like to ask you to also give just a few examples of how greater GVC participation could upgrade the indigenous innovation capability of the APO members' economies.
So actually, good example is even though not the APO members, but we have a lot of story regarding the China, and also among the these APO members, you can see that the Vietnam or some countries actually pretty much participating in the GVC, and they are actually received a lot of the foreign direct investment. That actually, the early stage, maybe there is some complaint that there are not much technical spillovers and something like that. But it takes some time. But participate in GVC and you try to learn some new technology and you imitate, and that definitely will actually increase your innovative capacity and improve productivity growth. But at the same time, like Korea is actually used also as a high-income country, used much of this, GVC participation, and at the same time, Korea can actually invest more on the R&D and the design or something like that, while these, less productive parties are actually set aside and goes to the, foreign outsourcing. So definitely, either high-income countries or low-income, the middle-income countries could actually benefit a lot, both participating in the GVCs.
Thank you, Professor Lee, for your examples of the case of Korea. And now I'd like to move on to another topic, which is mentioned in the presentation of Mr. Kim. It is about the industrial upgrading. So what are the lesson for the slowing of, what are the reasons for the slowing of industrial upgrading processes in the high income and upper middle income members, while we observe the acceleration in lower middle income members?
I assume that the major reason for such a slowing pattern of industrial upgrading or structural change, especially in high-income countries or upper middle-income countries, is that, like I mentioned earlier, they already experienced the industrialization process in the 1970s or 80s, but which means other additional efforts should be made to further productivity growth for those countries, which means also there is the ample room for the further productivity growth through industrial upgrading. But on the other hand, thankfully, the low-middle countries are in the process of accelerating structural change, thereby enhancing productivity growth. But this may not be the good sign, because many countries are currently entering in the premature deindustrialization process, as probably interested.
Yeah, thank you very much for your answer. And now I would like to go back to Professor Lee. It seems that from your result is the ICT investment is not benefiting all the members. So does the finding that not all countries are benefiting from ICT investment imply that investing in human capital is still more important for the majority of the APO members?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, the human capital is not only for the ICT investment, but the overall, economic growth and the productivity growth is actually human capital is, by history experience, this is one of the most decisive, factors for the economic growth and the productivity growth. But at the same time, ICT is more like you need skilled labor, right? So, which means that compared to you actually invest in some labor-intensive, industries, ICT is definitely need more skilled labor. So, which means that human capital and investing in human capital is one of the most important factor for this ICT, the development and also the impact of the productivity growth. But at the same time, as I mentioned, not only this the human capital issues, but you also think about this much of entrepreneurship and improving the management skills, and to improve the business condition would be also some complementary factors for the ICT development as well as the impact on the productivity.
Yeah, thank you very much for your confirmations that underline the importance of policy for human capital development. And as briefly touched upon by Mr. Kim in your previous answer, but we still like to confirm it again. Did you find this study any sign of premature industrialization in the groups of APO members country? Mr. Kim, please. Yes.
Yeah, so I did not put it in my presentation slide, but my answer is yes, they did. The 5 middle-income countries, India, Vietnam, Indonesia, and so on, before reaching a certain level of manufacturing development, they have already entered into the services economy. So which especially would probably account for not high value added sector within the services sector, but lower value added sector. So that's I think key concern.
Yeah. Thank you.
May I add something?
Yes, please, Professor Lee.
Okay, so if you look at the data, then for example, the upper middle income countries, in 1970, the manufacturing share was around 31.4%. But as of 2018, this is only 22.5%, which means that when we talk about this, deindustrialization, we usually consider as the sign for the advanced countries. But actually, over the last several decades, we have this, much accelerated pace of premature deindustrialization. That also connected to this middle income trap as well. And then, afterward, we will face a lot of, again, expansion of GBCs and as well as the digital transformation. This all actually somehow related with the industrialization. So countries should pay pretty much attention to these issues and how actually improve the more sustainable economic growth path.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Lee, for that confirmation. I think for the majority of the APO members who are really concerning about the middle income traps and whether or not they are entering their premature deindustrialization stage is very much crucial for the policymaker to look at in depth into this. And I think we are running out of time, so I would like just to pose the last question to both speakers. You have listed out a lot of policy recommendation in your presentation. So could you just briefly highlight two best recommendation that should be followed by the policymakers in our members? So the question is, how should policymakers prioritize among the vast spectrum of recommendation in your presentation to implement those? And I would like to hear from both of you, so please be brief. May I invite Professor Lee first?
Okay, so first of all, still, even though we are facing the widespread trade protectionism, but you always still remember that this benefit of a free trade. So in that sense, I think this, as I mentioned, the backward participation and some policy related to that one would be quite important. And the second one is, as far as concerning this ICT development, not just investing the ICT, but also you should improve some business environment as well as a human capital.
Yeah. Thank you for your answer, and may I invite Mr. Kim to supplement to that?
So in my presentations, it's kind of the heterogeneous impact has been found. So, and also based on that, the policy recommendations made in my study are rather broad, but it suggests the policy directions for the further productivity growth. But based upon these directions, I think more effort may be needed for the policymakers for APO member countries. Let's say they should clearly identify their development challenges with due considerations to given their own country. So I think that's the starting point for further policy interventions, especially in the context of COVID-19 era. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your message. And once again, thank you very much, our two speakers, Professor Lee and Mr. Kim, for the highlights of the findings of our upcoming APO Productivity Outlook 2021. And also thanks our viewers for watching the session. And we hope that within 1 hour short, the sharing from our speaker could give you a glimpse of the productivity outlooks in the region, the underlying determinants of manufacturing productivity, and how these factors of global value chain, ICT development are shaping the prospect of manufacturing productivity in the APO members. And we also expect that our upcoming publication will provide an in-depth analysis and implication to even though just a selected number of member country, but it will be useful for our policy analysts and policymakers to track the quality of economic growth and manufacturing productivity growth. So our full publication will APO Productivity Outlook will be coming soon on the APO website. So to our viewers, please stay tuned with our P-Talks and check out the APO publication. And once again, thank you very much to our two speakers for your insightful sharing on the joint endeavor between the APO and the KDI. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.